In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains the two sides of nature and culture.
So you've got your individual, that's you, the hero. Then you got the adversary to that. That's your enemy, wherever that enemy might happen to be. That's the forces that oppose you, but mostly psychological forces of one form or another. Then you've got the father. Well, there's two kinds of fathers. What kind? Good fathers and bad fathers. So here's an example. The Lion King. So the Lion King has a father, right? Mufasa. And Mufasa has a brother. Who's his brother? Scar. And what's up with Scar? Not a pleasant guy. Partly maybe because he's scarred. Something's well, really, eh? He's kind of skinny. He said he came from the shallow end of the gene pool. Obviously something's happened to him because he has this scar. He's arrogant and brilliant, which is a very common set of attributes for negative father figures. And he's out to do in the king. Right, so what does he represent? Well, you could say, here's a way of thinking about it sociologically. One of the things you hear very frequently, I'm sure many of you have heard this ad nauseum, is that there's such a thing as the patriarchy, right? The patriarchy. Well, okay, the patriarchy is a mythological construct. And I mean that technically speaking. You have a paternal figure that basically can represent the father directly, or it can represent the structure of male power. It's not just male power, but whatever. For the time being, we'll stick with that. It has a positive aspect, which is why you get to sit here and you're not being snowed on and freezing to death. That's the positive element. And it has a negative element. And the negative element is the arbitrary tyranny that's associated with any social organization. There's 60,000 students for a starter. Like, what the hell do you matter? You know, really, you're numbered. And it feels like that a lot of the time. You know, and so it's a very impersonal institution. And you're sort of tossed into it. So you're basically facing a giant of some magnitude who's kind of blind and who's sort of archaic, which is always what culture is, right? Culture is always blind because it's a product of yesterday, and it's archaic. It's not up to date. So you're going to have a problem with it, and you have that problem when you come to the university. So you stick with it, though, because it's got two faces. One face is sink or swim there, guys. And the other face is, man, if you're careful and you establish a relationship with this kind of institution, you can learn so much that you won't even be the same person when you come out. Maybe you'll be able to think. That'd be good, you know. If you learn to think, then you don't run into sharp things when you wander through life because you're smart enough to see where they are and avoid them, you know. And maybe you can think your way to a target, or maybe you can even think about a target that's worthwhile and you can figure out how to attain it. And maybe you learn to write, and then you can articulate your ideas and you can express them with some power. And you can you can be a positive force in the world, and you can be successful in all sorts of ways. And if you have to put up with being tyrannized by a, half-dead monster with Alzheimer's disease that's blind, well, that's life. And it could be a lot worse, because at least you're contending with something that has a positive element. You know, in lots of societies, if you're up against the blind giant of society, the best that you can hope for is that it isn't running around trying to stomp on you all the time. And I would say that's more the standard human experience. So yeah, there's a patriarchy, and yeah, it's negative, obviously. It's always been like that. But by the same token, there's a good guy embedded in that too, and that's the thing you want to have a relationship with. And that's the same old story. It's always been like that. There's always a wise king and a tyrant. And they're always fighting. And sometimes the wise king wins, sometimes the tyrant wins. And then when the tyrant wins, it's up to the hero to defeat the tyrant and reestablish the rightful king. And that's actually what you're trying to do when you're in university. Because the rightful king, in some sense, is a corpse that's embedded inside the university. And your job is to revivify it. You're the living element of the university. And all the knowledge is dead. It's just lying around, and some of it's out of date. You come in here and you revive it so that society can continue and so that you can benefit from the relationship. Well, that's the positive and negative great father, the wise king and the tyrant. And then another level is the feminine. The feminine is not women. Women partake of the feminine and the masculine, just like men partake of the feminine and the masculine. But the maternal element, the feminine element, is nature. Positive nature, well, that's the thing the environmentalists love, right? That's flowers and French landscapes and, you know, pleasant days picnicking in the park and beautiful sunshine and fresh air and clean water. But then there's another side. And the other side is, do you know what the guinea worm is? Does anybody know what a guinea worm is? Well, I'm going to tell you, although you're not going to be happy about it. So, a guinea worm is this horrible parasite that burrows under the skin, mostly of children, mostly in Africa. And it's about 2 feet long, so it makes these coils around their legs. And then it'll poke its little head out. And then you can pull it out, but it tends to break. And if that happens, then it gets infected and maybe you die. And so you can wrap it around a pencil very slowly and pull it out. That's nature. Now there's a doctor who's a Canadian doctor who wasn't really very happy about those damn guinea worms, and he's just about eradicated them. And like, hooray for him. But you know, when we're talking about the environment, especially when we're thinking about it in mythological categories and we're talking about nature, it's like, yeah, it's nature in all its beneficial glory, but it's also all the things that would just as soon eat you in the most awful possible way. And you need to know that too, because if you think of nature as only beneficial in its positive archetypal element, that's Mother Nature in all her glory, then you tend to denigrate the utility of the positive element of culture. You know, it's culture that protects you from the horrible elements of nature. You wouldn't even be able to think about nature as beautiful if you weren't already so protected from it. You know, you're more protected from it than any human beings ever have been anywhere in the entire history of life. And so in this unbelievably protected environment, you can think, oh, well, we should go easy on nature because isn't it so beautiful? It's like, yeah, well, yes and no. And it's not all beauty. It's certainly not, because nature will eventually kill you. So even if it doesn't, well, it's going to kill you. It will also make you sick. It will also make everyone that you know sick, and it will kill all of them too. So it's not such a bad thing to have a little bit of empathy for human beings, given that we have to contend with that. And you know, if we're destroying everything, which we're not, it's also returning the favor.